So today we're going to talk about complex numbers. To do that, we first need to talk about the definition of I. I is equal to the square root of -1. It's our imaginary numbers. So from this definition, it follows that I squared is equal to -1. Because if we square the square root and square cancel each other out. Now, if we have the square root of a negative number, so we use b, but I know that putting in more letters just makes it confusing sometimes. If you have a negative under a square root with just a single number, that means that you can take an I out because of the negative, and you're left with the square root of the number. Now you can also write this as the square root of the number times I, so the I at the end. But the moment that your radical goes over the I, that's not okay. That is not the same thing, because then you're putting an I back under the radical, and we just got the I out from the radical. Okay. So what we need to do next is look at simplifying some of these guys. And I'm going to have a calculator out that we're going to use. The calculator I am going to be using is desmos.com/scientific. There is also a Desmos app that you can use on your phone. It's pretty nifty, not gonna lie, I have it on my phone. I use it quite frequently. Okay, so example number 1, we need to simplify the following expressions. And it says in terms of I, because notice these all have a negative under the square root. So if we're looking at the first one, we have a -64. Since we have that negative under the radical, we're going to take out an I, which means we have I square root of 64. If you know what the square root of 64 is off the top of your head, awesome. But let's say you don't. So I go to my calculator and I take the square root of 64. I get 8, which means since there's no decimal, I'm not going to have a square root anymore. This becomes I, and we just said 64 was 8. The square root of 64 is 8, but we don't write I8 just like we don't write X8. So I'm going to rewrite this as 8I. Let's look at our next one. We have the square root of -50. There's a negative under the square root on the 50, which means we're going to take out an I. And I have I square root of 50. So I go to my calculator, I take the square root of 50, and I get a decimal. Because I have a decimal, I need to break down my radicals. I know that some of you will be comfortable breaking down your numbers using perfect squares, and that's fantastic. I'm going to use the factor tree or the number tree and tree it out to break down my 50. So I need two numbers that multiply to be 50. It can be any numbers we want. If you did 2 and 25, that's fine. I'm going to do 10 and 5. Because I broke down the 50, I'm going to cross it out. It goes away. 5 can't be broken down, but 10 is 2 times 5, which means that the 10 goes away since I broke it down. Remember that our index is our little number on the radical, and if we can't see it, it's a 2 for the square root, which means we need 2 of the same number to form a group. We have 2 5s, and then the only number not crossed out or circled is that 2. The 2 remains. That means that we get to bring out our 5 since we circled it. So we're going to have 5i. We have a square root remaining because we have something we pointed an arrow towards, which is 2. So our answer is 5i square root 2. Or you can write it 5 root 2 times I. But remember that I needs to not be under the radical. Let's look at the third one. We have -3 times the square root of -108. That -3 is out front and the negative does not push into the radical. We have a negative under the square root, which means that we will be pulling out an I. So we're going to have -3 times our I square root of +108. Remember, by taking out the I, the negative goes away from under the radical. We go back to our calculator. We take the square root of 108 and we get a decimal. Remember, if you get a decimal, that means that you need to use the factor tree. We need to break it down because it asks for an exact answer. So when we get a nice whole number, like the square root of 64 gave us 8, that we do not have a radical in our answer. So let's break down our 108. You can break this down however you would like. If you want to start with 2 and 54, you can. If you want to start with 4 and 27, you can. I'm going to do 4 and 27. Since we broke down the 108, I'm going to cross it out. 4 is going to become 2 times 2, which means we can get rid of the 4. 27 is going to wind up being 3. Oops, give me a second. 3 times 9. I broke down the 27, so I'm going to get rid of it. I can't break down either the 2s, can't break down the 3, but the 9 does become 3 and 3. Switch colors too early. Here we go. 3 and 3. My pen would work with me today. And since we broke down the 9, it can go away. Remember that we need to have 2 of the same number to be able to circle. So we have 2 2s, so we can circle our 2s. We have 3 3s, but we can only circle 2 of them because we can only take groups of 2 of the same number. It's like you are in a carnival ride. If there's only seating for 2 people, you're not going to try to shove a third one into the seat. So I'm drawing an arrow to my 3. That's not circle. I have my -3 I already out front. I'm going to bring out a 2 that we circled. and a 3 that we circle. And then if there's anything we drew an arrow to, it remains inside, which is that lone 3. All the numbers on the outside are going to get multiplied together. So we're going to take -3 times 2 times 3, and we should get -18i. And then we have our square root of 3. So our answer, we're going to write it either -18i root 3 or -18 square root of 3 times I, where the I is most definitely not under the radical.